The flickering embers cast dancing shadows across Elias's deeply lined face, illuminating a profound understanding etched into his weary eyes, a sorrow almost as ancient as the forest itself. He sat cross-legged on a worn blanket, his gnarled hands warming themselves near the humble fire, the scent of pine and damp earth clinging to his clothes. It was a familiar tableau, one repeated countless nights in the solitary heart of the great woods. But tonight there was a palpable weight to his stillness, a silent testament to a lifelong secret, a connection forged in the wild, misunderstood and fiercely guarded. Every crackle of the fire, every rustle of leaves beyond the tree line, seemed to whisper fragments of his extraordinary journey. Elias Thorne, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and pity in the nearest logging towns, was a man who lived outside the conventional margins of society. Nearing his late 70s, his frame was still wiry and strong, honed by decades of living off the land, his movements fluid and silent as a specter. He was a woodsman of the old guard, a reclusive figure whose existence was inextricably linked to the vast, untamed forests of the Pacific Northwest. For over 50 years, he had dwelled in this verdant expanse, his rustic cabin a mere whisper of human presence against the overwhelming grandeur of nature. Locals often dismissed him as eccentric, a hermit driven by some peculiar obsession. They couldn't have known the true fervor that fueled his reclusion, the unspoken quest that had consumed his every waking moment since his youth. It all began when Elias was a much younger man, barely out of his teens, fresh-faced and eager to carve out a life in the wilderness. He had been trapping deep in a rarely explored canyon when he first stumbled upon the unmistakable signs, not the tracks of a deer or a bear, but something far larger, far more hominid, yet distinctly not human. Gigantic footprints, easily twice the size of his own, pressed into the soft loam beside a hidden stream. Twisted branches, snapped with impossible force, lay scattered nearby, arranged in patterns that felt deliberate, almost like trail markers. There was a faint, musky scent in the air, earthy and primal. The experience had been fleeting, a moment of profound disorientation and awe. He tried to tell a few people, tried to describe the chilling certainty that had settled within him, but his words were met with dismissive chuckles, pitying glances, and the casual accusation of having spent too much time alone. Society, in its comfortable arrogance, had no room for such wild tales. But for Elias, that single, unverified encounter ignited a fire within him, a lifelong obsession that would ultimately draw him irrevocably away from the conventional path, from family, friends, and the easy comforts of modern life. His initial attempts at contact were, in retrospect, laughably clumsy. Armed with a cheap camera and an unshakable belief, he'd crashed through the undergrowth, calling out, leaving crude offerings of food in obvious spots. He'd spent countless nights in uncomfortable hides, his youthful impatience warring with the serene patience the forest demanded. The result was predictably frustrating. He would catch fleeting glimpses, a massive, dark shape melting into the tree line, a swift, almost imperceptible movement deeper in the shadows. He'd hear distant howls that sent shivers down his spine, too deep and resonant to be any known animal. He was met only with evasive maneuvers, an uncanny ability by the elusive creatures to disappear without a trace, leaving him with nothing but blurred photographs and the gnawing certainty that he was onto something monumental. As the decades wore on, his dedication to the search became legendary among the few who knew of him. This unwavering pursuit, however, brought him not acclaim, but ridicule. He became Crazy Elias, the man who talked to trees and believed in ghosts. This growing reputation effectively isolated him, pushing him further into the embrace of the wilderness. Yet, this isolation was his greatest teacher. It forced him to shed the trappings of human expectation and to truly listen to the forest. He became intimately familiar with every ridge, every valley, every stream. He learned the subtle language of the wind through the pines, the calls of the nocturnal creatures, the delicate balance of the ecosystem. He developed an unparalleled understanding of the forest and, more importantly, of its hidden inhabitants. His initial desire for proof slowly transmuted into something deeper, a profound need to understand, to connect, to simply know. Before we delve deeper into Elias's extraordinary journey, a journey that would redefine his understanding of loyalty, fear, and the profound secrets held within nature's grasp, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of explorers. Your support helps us uncover more hidden tales, like Elias's, stories that challenge our perceptions and remind us of the vast, uncharted mysteries that still exist in our world. Over countless seasons, Elias Thorne transformed his initial clumsy attempts at contact into a nuanced, almost ceremonial endeavor. He refined his methods with the patience of a true forest sage, meticulously observing the subtle cues of the wilderness. His primary goal had subtly shifted over the years, evolving from a simple desire for a fleeting sighting to a profound ambition for genuine understanding. He began to learn the intricate language of the forest, deciphering the meaning behind the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant cry of an eagle, all as potential messages from the elusive inhabitants he sought. Tracking patterns became an art, a deeply intuitive process where he could predict movements based on water sources, berry patches, and even changes in wind direction. He learned to leave offerings not as bait, but as respectful gestures, simple gifts of foraged nuts, dried fruits, or carefully placed river stones, always placed subtly, never intrusively, at locations he suspected they frequented. Years blurred into decades, marked not by human calendars, but by the silent acknowledgments he began to receive. The initial, almost imperceptible signs of their acceptance slowly gained clarity. He would find his offerings taken, sometimes replaced by a peculiar, distinct grouping of pebbles or a twisted branch, signs he painstakingly learned to interpret as reciprocal gestures. Then came the tentative exchanges. He would leave a small, precisely chipped flint tool, a product of his own long-honed wilderness skills, and in return, he might later discover a pile of plump, ripe berries, or a handful of unusually large, perfectly symmetrical mushroom caps at his usual offering spot. This slow, deliberate dance of reciprocity was more profound than any spoken word, forging a silent, slow-burning trust between a lone man and a specific, localized group of Sasquatch. It was a relationship built on mutual respect and an unspoken agreement of non-aggression, a testament to Elias's unwavering patience and deep empathy. Within this particular group, Elias started to discern individual personalities, a realization that further humanized his understanding of them. There was the agile, curious juvenile who occasionally peered from behind ancient cedars, and the protective female who often kept her distance but whose watchful eyes missed nothing. But it was a large, imposing male, with a presence that commanded quiet deference from the others, whom Elias mentally named Elder. Elder possessed an air of immense wisdom, a stoic calm that belied his powerful physique. He was the most cautious of the group, rarely approaching, yet it was clear he tolerated Elias's presence more than any other. His gaze, when it met Elias's across a clearing, was not one of fear or aggression, but a deep, evaluating scrutiny, a silent assessment that seemed to weigh Elias's intentions with profound intelligence. This nascent connection with Elder became the cornerstone of Elias's deepening understanding. It was Elder, through his consistent behavior, who inadvertently illuminated a peculiar and persistent anomaly: the Sasquatch's profound avoidance of the forest's edge. Elias noticed it early on, a subtle but undeniable pattern. They rarely ventured close to the boundary, where the dense protective canopy gave way to open clearings, human trails, or the distant glint of civilization. When circumstances, such as migrating game or a particularly abundant berry patch, dictated a proximity to this invisible line, their demeanor would visibly shift. A quiet unease would settle upon them. Their movements became more furtive, their senses acutely heightened. Elias witnessed them halt abruptly, their bodies tensing, their eyes scanning the horizon with an almost palpable apprehension whenever even the faintest sounds of human settlements, the distant hum of a vehicle, the faint clang of metal, or the muffled baying of a dog, drifted on the wind. It was more than mere caution. It was a deeply ingrained, almost primal aversion to that liminal space. As Elias spent more and more time observing them, his initial fascination blossomed into a profound empathy. He witnessed their undeniable intelligence in their resourcefulness, their problem-solving skills, and their complex communication. He saw the tender, fierce bonds within their family units, the way the adults protected the young, the playful interactions between juveniles, and the quiet comfort they found in each other's presence. Their deep, intrinsic connection to the wilderness was undeniable. They moved through the ancient trees with an effortless grace that spoke of centuries of adaptation. Every action harmonized with the rhythm of the forest. This intimate understanding deepened Elias's respect for them immeasurably and cemented his commitment to their absolute secrecy. He became their silent guardian, a solitary human sentinel standing between their hidden world and the encroaching curiosity and development of his own kind, driven by the unwavering belief that these magnificent, mysterious beings deserved their sanctuary and their peace more than any fleeting human validation. His life had become inextricably linked to theirs, a sacred trust forged in the heart of the wild. The relationship between Elias and Elder, the sagacious Sasquatch, deepened from a fragile tolerance into a profound, unspoken understanding that transcended species. Years of patient observation, mutual respect, and quiet coexistence had woven a silent tapestry of trust between the solitary man and the elusive wildling. It was a bond forged not through words, but through shared moments in the ancient forest, through the exchange of simple gestures, and perhaps through an almost telepathic empathy that Elias had cultivated over his decades of unwavering dedication. Elder, once a figure of immense caution, now occasionally left small, deliberate markers for Elias, guiding him to certain areas of particular interest or significance. Sometimes it was a specific moss-covered rock, angled just so. Other times, a broken branch laid across a game trail, subtle cues that only Elias, with his intimate knowledge of the Sasquatch's habits, could decipher. These markers weren't just navigational aids. They were invitations, threads pulling Elias deeper into their hidden world, hinting at secrets waiting to be unveiled. Elias spent countless hours, days, and weeks observing the Sasquatch, immersing himself in their intricate lives. He meticulously documented their hunting techniques, marveling at their efficiency and their profound respect for the prey they took. They were masters of the forest, moving with an almost liquid grace through dense undergrowth, their powerful forms disappearing into shadows as if absorbed by the very trees. He observed their complex social structures, noticing the hierarchical nuances, the nurturing of the young, and the protective instincts that bound their family units together. Their communication methods were a symphony of the wild, a complex series of guttural grunts, resonant howls that reverberated through the valleys, subtle hand gestures, and body language, so nuanced it took Elias years to begin to truly comprehend its intricate meanings. He saw their joy in play, their sorrow in loss, and their quiet contemplation, realizing they possessed an emotional depth that many humans would struggle to acknowledge. Yet, despite this deepening intimacy, the Sasquatch's fear of the forest's edge remained an enigmatic puzzle, an invisible wall that Elias could not penetrate. It wasn't merely a fear of humans. It was something far more profound, a primal aversion to the boundary that separated their ancient, verdant world from the encroaching, ever-changing realm of humanity. Whenever the group neared the peripheral zones, even if human presence was distant or undetectable, an unmistakable tension would ripple through them. Their movements would become more guarded, their vocalizations more subdued, and their wary glances would frequently dart towards the distant, hazy line where the dense canopy gave way to open sky. Elias carefully observed these almost ritualistic displays of unease, noting the raised hackles of their fur, the wide, darting eyes, and the low, rumbling growls that spoke of deep-seated apprehension rather than immediate threat. Elias dedicated himself to understanding this ingrained phobia. He tried to interpret their body language and vocalizations specifically when they were near the edge. He noticed consistent signs of distress and fear, not just caution. It wasn't the wary alertness one might expect from an animal encountering danger, but a deep, almost existential dread. Their posture would slump, their movements would become hesitant, and sometimes a young Sasquatch would whimper, clinging to its mother, as if sensing an unseen terror lurking beyond the tree line. Elder's demeanor, usually calm and composed, would betray a flicker of ancient sorrow whenever the edge came into view, his eyes holding a depth of pain that Elias couldn't quite fathom. It was as if the boundary itself was tainted, imbued with a memory of suffering that resonated through their very beings. Through these countless hours of observation, Elias began to piece together fragments of their history. He surmised that their deep-seated apprehension was not solely a reaction to current human encroachment, but rather stemmed from reasons far more ancient and deeply ingrained. He recalled the rare instances of their seemingly unwarranted panic, their sudden retreats from areas that held no obvious threat, always correlated with proximity to the forest's outer limits. He started to believe that their fear was not a learned behavior from individual dangerous encounters, but an inherited one, passed down through generations. There had to be a foundational event, a catastrophic memory woven into the collective consciousness of their kind, that made the forest's edge not just a place of potential danger, but a demarcation of profound and ancestral terror. The forest, boundless and protective, was their sanctuary. The edge, however, was a scar, a wound in the world that perpetually threatened to reopen, and Elias, with his growing respect and love for these magnificent creatures, felt an urgent, unspoken need to comprehend its true nature. The fragile peace Elias had cultivated, the silent understanding he had forged with Elder and his kin, began to fray as the relentless march of human progress encroached further into the ancient forest. A new, ominous threat loomed on the horizon, the telltale signs of logging companies surveying new areas. Their brightly colored flags, initially sporadic and far-flung, started appearing with unnerving frequency, drawing closer to the established territories of the Sasquatch. The distant hum of heavy machinery, once a faint whisper on the wind, grew into a persistent drone, a mechanical heartbeat echoing through the hallowed woods, portending destruction. The Sasquatch, usually so adept at blending into their environment, became visibly agitated. Their customary routines, honed over countless generations, were disrupted. Hunting patterns shifted. Their foraging expeditions grew shorter and more cautious, and the playful interactions among the younger members of the group diminished, replaced by a nervous energy. The fear of the forest's edge, already a dominant characteristic of their existence, intensified dramatically, fueled by the encroaching sounds and smells of human activity. Elias witnessed their distress firsthand. He saw Elder's deep-set eyes fill with a sorrowful knowledge, and the matriarchs of the group would gather their young closer, their deep, rumbling calls laced with an unfamiliar anxiety. They no longer merely avoided the edge. They actively recoiled from it, even from great distances, as if the very air near the boundary had become toxic. A profound sense of responsibility settled upon Elias. He had spent decades observing, learning, and earning their trust. Now, he felt an imperative to act, to protect these beings who had become his silent family. He began a subtle, solitary campaign of deterrence, using his unparalleled knowledge of the forest to his advantage. He would meticulously track the survey teams, waiting for them to leave for the day, then painstakingly remove their brightly colored markers, scattering them in confusing patterns far from the intended path. He created false tracks, mimicking those of apex predators or even other human interlopers, hoping to mislead the loggers into believing the terrain was too treacherous or already claimed. He loosened bolts on forgotten pieces of equipment, ensuring small, frustrating delays. He was a ghost in the woods, a silent guardian employing every trick he had learned to subtly disrupt the encroaching threat, buying the Sasquatch precious time. The tension in the forest became almost unbearable. One crisp autumn afternoon, a situation unfolded that would forever etch itself into Elias's memory. A young Sasquatch, perhaps out of an innate curiosity that often defied its elders' warnings, or perhaps driven by a momentary panic from the incessant distant growl of a bulldozer, wandered too close to a freshly cleared logging road. The raw, exposed earth of the road, a gaping wound in the verdant tapestry of the forest, was a stark symbol of the impending doom. The young one, small for its age, peered out from the dense undergrowth, its wide, dark eyes fixed on the alien sight. A small human patrol, making their rounds, was slowly approaching. They were laughing, casual, unaware of the ancient eyes watching them from the shadows. The young Sasquatch, caught between curiosity and terror, froze, its small body trembling. Just as one of the patrolmen turned his head, seemingly sensing something, Elder emerged from the deeper shadows with an astonishing speed and grace for such a large creature. He moved like a silent brown blur, covering the distance to the young one in a few powerful strides. With a single, swift motion, he scooped up the terrified juvenile, cradling it against his massive chest, and melted back into the impenetrable foliage. The patrolman, startled by the fleeting movement, blinked and shook his head, attributing it to an animal or a trick of the light. But Elias, hidden nearby in his own vantage point, saw it all. He saw the raw terror in Elder's eyes, the profound, almost human fear that contorted his usually stoic features, the deep, guttural cry that ripped from Elder's throat, a sound of primal anguish and desperation, was unlike anything Elias had ever heard before. It was not a roar of aggression, but a lament, a cry born of ancient pain and immediate, harrowing fear. This cry, more than any other sound, profoundly shook Elias, resonating deep within his own soul. It was a sound that spoke of a deep-seated vulnerability, of centuries of fear made manifest in a single, heart-wrenching moment. The incident solidified Elias's resolve. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that the fear of the edge was not merely a survival instinct, but a profound, almost spiritual trauma, and that the Sasquatch were teetering on the precipice of another cataclysm, one he was now fiercely determined to prevent. The logging company's encroaching presence wasn't just a threat to their habitat. It was a revival of an ancient terror, pushing them closer to a boundary they were genetically predisposed to dread. Elias understood then that his role had shifted from observer to protector, from friend to guardian. The stakes had never been higher, and the forest, with its silent, ancient inhabitants, relied on his unwavering commitment. He felt the weight of generations of Sasquatch fear on his shoulders, an unbearable burden that fueled his every clandestine act. The profound terror etched into Elder's eyes, the guttural cry that had escaped his massive frame as he snatched the young Sasquatch from the precipice of human danger, resonated deeply within Elias. It was a sound that transcended mere fear. It was the raw, unburdened lament of ages, a primal scream echoing ancestral trauma. That incident at the logging road, the near capture of the innocent young one, proved to be a pivotal moment, a turning point in the silent, decades-long relationship Elias had cultivated. Elder, usually the epitome of cautious composure, made a deliberate decision. He approached Elias, not with aggression or even his typical reserved curiosity, but with a palpable sense of urgency, an unspoken plea that Elias instinctually understood. Elder moved with a purpose Elias had rarely witnessed, his large form cutting through the undergrowth with an unusual directness. He didn't just walk, he led, his gaze frequently falling back on Elias, ensuring the old man followed. It wasn't a casual invitation to observe, as many of their past interactions had been, but a guided journey, a pilgrimage to specific locations. These weren't merely remote spots deep within the familiar forest. These were ancient, hidden places, tucked away in forgotten valleys, or beneath colossal, gnarled trees that predated generations of their kind. Each destination felt heavy with untold history, a silent testament to events long past, and Elias sensed, with a growing thrill of anticipation, that Elder was finally ready to reveal the true depth of their secret, the very essence of their profound, enduring fear. At the first sight, concealed behind a waterfall, whose spray kept the air perpetually cool and damp, Elias discovered ancient markings etched into the smooth rock face. They were unlike anything he had ever encountered, not the fleeting scratch marks of territorial animals, nor the simple pictograms of primitive human tribes. These were intricate, almost hieroglyphic, depicting figures and events that defied easy interpretation. Elder stood silently beside him, his gaze fixed on the carvings, occasionally emitting a low rumble, a sound Elias now recognized as a form of communication, a subtle emphasis. Elias spent hours tracing the lines with his fingertips, his mind racing, trying to decipher the narrative hidden within the symbols. He saw images of Sasquatch-like figures. Yes, but also strange structures, celestial bodies, and scenes of apparent chaos and destruction radiating from a defined boundary. Elder continued to lead him, sometimes for days, to other such sites. There were markings on the bark of impossibly ancient trees, symbols carved into fallen megaliths, half buried in the earth, and even arrangements of unusual stones that, upon closer inspection, formed patterns reminiscent of the pictograms. Each new finding added another layer to the unfolding mystery. Elias, drawing upon his years of keen observation and his deep empathy for these creatures, began to piece together a fragmented but compelling story. The symbols spoke of a great divide, a cataclysmic event long ago where the forest's edge was not merely a geographical boundary, but a barrier of true peril, a threshold from which a devastating force had once emerged. It was a narrative of profound loss and transformation. The markings depicted their ancestors living in harmony within the boundless forest, venturing towards the edge with curiosity, not fear. Then came the change. Bold, aggressive lines radiating from the periphery, engulfing Sasquatch figures in waves of what appeared to be suffering or dissolution. There were symbols of fire, of strange lights in the sky, and of figures, not quite human, not quite Sasquatch, that seemed to emanate a cold, destructive energy. The edge, as portrayed in these ancient chronicles, became a point of origin for a pervasive, inexplicable malevolence. It wasn't just a place where their kind encountered challenges. It was where their very existence had been threatened, where numerous generations had suffered unimaginable trauma. With each new revelation, Elias's understanding deepened. He grasped that their fear wasn't merely a rational avoidance of modern humans and their noisy, destructive machines. It was an ancestral trauma, a deep-seated, almost genetic memory of a specific, destructive force that once emanated precisely from that border between their verdant world and what became the open, unforgiving human world. The markings didn't just show events. They conveyed emotion, fear, sorrow, and a profound sense of abandonment. The forest's edge, to the Sasquatch, was not just a line on a map. It was the scar of a wound, a vivid, painful reminder of a time when everything they knew and loved was imperiled by something that emerged from beyond their sanctuary. This ancient, terrifying history, imprinted upon generations, explained the almost religious reverence with which they avoided the periphery, and the raw, guttural cry of old elder now made agonizing sense. It was the echo of a forgotten apocalypse, a warning passed down through the silent ages, an indelible mark of fear etched into their very souls. The fragmented clues Elias had gathered culminated in a new, profound chapter of understanding. Guided by Elder, he spent weeks immersed in the Sasquatch's hidden history, meticulously piecing together the full narrative from the ancient markings etched into venerable trees and smooth river stones. These weren't mere symbols. They were chronicles, intricately woven tapestries of a bygone era, painstakingly preserved for generations. Elder would lead him to a gnarled cedar, its bark riddled with specific patterns, then to a moss-covered boulder bearing similar, yet distinct etchings. With gestures and deep, rumbling vocalizations, Elder would emphasize certain markings, drawing Elias's attention to their sequence and significance, allowing the woodsman to gradually decipher the complex lexicon of their ancestral past. The markings revealed a chilling truth. The edge was not merely a physical boundary, but a place imbued with the memory of a destructive, unseen force. It spoke of a time when the border between their world and what lay beyond had been a conduit for immense suffering and unimaginable loss. The pictograms depicted not human armies or hunters, but swirling, malevolent energies, towering structures that belched smoke, and strange, luminous objects that rained down devastation. These images were interwoven with figures of Sasquatch in agony, their forms contorted in fear, fleeing from an invisible blight that seemed to emanate directly from the liminal space where the deep forest met the open world. It was a saga of catastrophe, a cataclysm that had profoundly reshaped their existence. Elias began to comprehend that the forest's edge was for the Sasquatch, metaphorically and perhaps literally, a profound wound in the fabric of their world. This wasn't a fresh injury, but an ancient scar, a place of historical cataclysm that had imprinted itself onto their very being, creating a genetic memory of fear so potent it echoed through countless generations. The pictographs detailed how generations had perished attempting to flee or combat this encroaching menace, how their lands had been scorched, their peaceful existence shattered. It was a narrative of survival against overwhelming odds, but also one of indelible trauma that had fundamentally altered their perception of the world beyond the trees. The edge represented not just a geographical limit, but a historical trauma zone, a constant reminder of a time when their world had nearly ended. Elias realized with a heavy heart that the Sasquatch weren't just avoiding modern humans or their machines. They were actively avoiding a place intricately associated with profound historical trauma and a lingering, perceived danger that transcended individual human encounters. Their timidity wasn't cowardice. It was a deeply ingrained survival mechanism, a wisdom born from ancient pain. The young Sasquatch whimpering near the edge wasn't fearing a lumberjack. It was subconsciously reacting to the echo of devastation represented by that boundary. Elder's sorrowful gaze wasn't merely over encroaching development, but reflected the weight of generations of memory, a silent testament to the suffering his ancestors had endured at that very line of demarcation. The fear was not rational in a human sense, but profoundly logical within the context of their collective memory. This revelation weighed heavily on Elias, a crushing burden of knowledge that changed his entire perspective. He understood their lifelong timidity, their elusive nature, and the deep-seated, generations-long fear passed down through their lineage. It wasn't distrust of him, an individual human, that kept them hidden, but a vast, ancestral terror of the boundary that had once almost annihilated their kind. He recognized that their avoidance of the edge was an act of profound self-preservation, a silent, continuous vigil against a threat that, to them, remained ever-present, even if unseen by human eyes. The sounds of distant machinery were not just annoying intrusions. They were dissonant chords in a symphony of ancient dread, threatening to replay a forgotten tragedy. Elias felt a surge of protective instinct, stronger than anything he had ever known. His quest had shifted from mere observation to an urgent, desperate need to safeguard these beings. He understood now that their very existence was a testament to resilience, their cautious hiding a legacy of survival against an almost incomprehensible past threat radiating from the edge. The forest was not just their home, it was their sanctuary, their shield against a world that had once tried to erase them. And the edge, that arbitrary line on a map for humanity, was to them the scarred frontier of their deepest, most enduring nightmare. With this knowledge, Elias's solitary life gained an even greater purpose, intertwining his destiny with that of the Sasquatch, binding him to their ancient sorrow and their silent, continued struggle for existence against an unknowable, historical foe. The weight of their history became his own, and the quiet dignity of their survival a profound inspiration. He knew then that his path was irrevocably linked to theirs, and he would protect their ancient wound from further damage, whatever the cost. The distant rumble of heavy machinery grew louder each day, a relentless, mechanical pulse throbbing through the ancient forest, sending tremors not just through the earth, but through Elias's very soul. He watched, hidden amongst the ferns and moss-draped cedars, as surveyors, now bolder, painted bright orange marks upon trees dangerously close to what he knew was a vital Sasquatch birthing ground. The air, usually thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, was increasingly tainted with the acrid smell of diesel and the fainter, yet equally disturbing scent of human ambition. The Sasquatch, particularly the females and youngsters, were exhibiting heightened anxiety, their usually quiet movements replaced by restless pacing and low, worried chitters. Elder, whom Elias now saw not just as a leader, but as a confidant in this shared secret, often stood on elevated ground, his massive frame silhouetted against the waning light, gaze fixed towards the encroaching threat. His body language was a profound mixture of ancient despair and simmering frustration. Elias knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could no longer remain a silent observer. His decades of patient study, his careful cultivation of trust, all would be rendered meaningless if this sacred ground, this sanctuary, pregnant with generational history and future life, was desecrated. He couldn't warn the Sasquatch in a human tongue, nor could he directly confront the loggers with tales of ancient traumas and mythical beasts. His methods had to be as subtle, as integral to the forest, as the Sasquatch themselves. Elias concocted a desperate plan, one born of intimate knowledge of this wilderness and a deep, fierce love for its hidden inhabitants. It was a plan that relied on creating an illusion, making this corner of the forest so utterly unappealing, so riddled with unforeseen complications, that human industry would simply turn its back and seek easier conquests. His confrontation with the logging operation would not be one of direct violence, but of cunning and relentless inconvenience. He started by sabotaging survey markers, not just moving them, but meticulously recreating false markers miles away, leading the survey teams on wild goose chases through impassable terrain. He would dismantle recently installed flagging, scatter their tools, and subtly alter paths they had painstakingly carved, always under the cloak of night or the cover of dense fog. He became a phantom, a whisper in the woods, leaving behind just enough evidence of human interference to cause confusion, but never enough to be caught. He used his deep understanding of local wildlife, orchestrating disturbances that would seem natural, but were, in fact, carefully orchestrated diversions. He dismantled temporary bridges, clogged water sources crucial for machinery, and even, on one memorable occasion, expertly guided a territorial mama bear and her cubs dangerously close to a fresh logging camp, sending the crew into a panic. Elder and the Sasquatch group, though never seen directly participating, provided subtle, almost imperceptible assistance. Elias often found newly felled trees conveniently blocking paths he needed cleared, or heavy rocks strategically placed to aid his climbs. Once, a vital piece of logging equipment, left unattended, was discovered days later inexplicably mired deep in a previously dry bog, far from its original spot. Elias suspected that the immense strength and intimate knowledge of the landscape possessed by the Sasquatch were being quietly deployed to facilitate his guerrilla tactics. There were times when he would leave his own tools unattended, only to find them sharpened, repaired, or replaced with perfectly suited alternatives when he returned. It was a silent collaboration, an unspoken pact forged in the crucible of shared desperation. They understood his intent, and in their own way, they contributed to their collective survival. The loggers, initially annoyed, soon became frustrated, then utterly bewildered. Equipment failures became rampant. Roads that were perfectly passable one day would be inexplicably blocked by rockfalls or fallen timber the next. Their expensive cutting tools would mysteriously dull or disappear. Supplies would vanish from secured storage, The surveyors reported increasingly inaccurate readings and strange, disorienting phenomena. Morale plummeted. They started complaining of ghosts in the forest, of malevolent spirits actively working against them. Their reports back to the company grew increasingly desperate, detailing impossible obstacles and inexplicable setbacks. Profits began to dwindle, consumed by repeated repairs, lost time, and the sheer inefficiency of working in an area that seemed to actively resist their presence. The cost-benefit analysis of working this particular stretch of forest began to tilt heavily in Elias's favor. Eventually, the logging company's exasperation reached its peak. The constant delays, the mysterious incidents, the inexplicable difficulties that plagued every attempt to make progress, all combined to create an economic nightmare. The supervisors, tired of the endless excuses and the dwindling output, deemed the area simply too problematic, too difficult, and far too costly to continue operations. The forest seemed to fight back with an intelligence and a ferocity they couldn't comprehend. With a final, exasperated sigh, and likely a significant loss of capital, the logging company abandoned their plans. The machinery was eventually packed up and hauled away, leaving behind only the scars of their initial incursion, slowly to be reclaimed by the resilient forest. The deep, guttural thrum of industry faded into the distance, replaced once more by the ancient symphony of the wind through the pines, the rustle of leaves, and the distant calls of forest creatures. The vital birthing ground was safe, its sanctity preserved by the quiet, unwavering resolve of an old man, and the unseen, silent power of the beings he protected. Elias watched the last truck disappear over the horizon, a profound weariness settling over him, but also an immense quiet satisfaction. He had stood between two worlds, and against all odds, he had won. The ancient wound, for now, would remain undisturbed. The immediate threat, for now, had been averted. The logging company, thoroughly frustrated and financially drained by the string of uncanny misfortunes and relentless logistical nightmares, finally pulled its operations out of the region. They deemed the area cursed, unprofitable, and simply not worth the effort. Their executives shaking their heads, unable to explain the consistent equipment failures, the strangely misleading survey markers, or the sudden, inexplicable shifts in soil stability that made road building impossible in key areas. The deep forest, particularly the vital Sasquatch territories and the ancient birthing grounds, remained undisturbed, a fragile peace settling once more over the venerable trees. Elias watched their final retreat from a concealed vantage point, a profound sense of relief washing over him, mingled with the quiet exhaustion of a battle fought and won, albeit unconventionally. His ingenious, subtle sabotage, aided by the unseen hands of the Sasquatch, had worked. Elias, now older, undoubtedly frailer from the sustained intensity of his recent efforts, retreated deeper into the sanctuary of the forest with the turning of the seasons. His gaunt frame was more stooped, his steps a little slower, but his eyes still held that piercing, ancient wisdom, now softened by a profound peace. He continued his silent guardianship, a sentinel against the ever-present encroachment of the outside world, knowing intrinsically that his time as an active protector was drawing to a close. Each breath became a conscious act of gratitude, each rustle of leaves a whispered testament to the longevity of the ancient beings he had come to love and understand. He continued his ritual offerings, not just of sustenance, but of respect and shared quietude, marking the passage of days and months in harmonic rhythm with the wilderness he inhabited. His bond with Elder and the entire Sasquatch group had solidified into an enduring, unspoken pact, a tapestry woven from decades of mutual observation tentative trust, and ultimately, a shared crucible of crisis. There were no grand gestures, no overt declarations, only a deepening of the silent understanding that already existed. Elder would occasionally appear at the periphery of Elias's camp, a silent, imposing figure, his gaze holding an undeniable depth of gratitude and respect. Sometimes Elias would find a meticulously placed pile of berries near his lean-to, or a discarded, expertly chipped stone tool, silent tokens of their enduring acknowledgement and appreciation. He had earned their trust not through force or demand, but through patience, empathy, and ultimately, by placing their needs and their ancient fears above his own safety. He had helped secure their safety, at least for this generation, buying them invaluable time in a world that increasingly sought to diminish their existence. Elias understood, with a profound and somewhat melancholic acceptance, that the forest's edge would always carry a historical weight for the Sasquatch. It was a scar on their collective memory, a wound that might never truly heal, a perennial reminder of a devastating past. His actions had not erased that ancient trauma, but he had eased their present burden, provided a temporary reprieve from immediate threats, and perhaps allowed them to breathe a little easier within their secluded world. His entire life's quest, first driven by youthful curiosity, and then by an unshakable conviction, had culminated in the protection of the very beings he had once simply sought to understand. He had transcended the role of observer to become a quiet, fierce advocate, sacrificing a conventional life for a higher calling. Years later, after a long, full life, lived entirely on his own terms and intertwined with the rhythm of the forest, Elias Thorne died peacefully in his sleep, a true guardian of the wilderness, his body returning to the earth he so revered, his spirit undoubtedly merging with the ancient whispers of the trees. He was found by Elder, who watched over his last resting place for days, a silent vigil beneath the canopy, a final testament to the extraordinary connection forged between man and myth. Elias's story is a testament to the profound mysteries that still exist in our world, and the incredible, often unspoken, connections we can forge when we open our hearts and minds to the possibilities beyond our conventional understanding. If this extraordinary journey moved you, if it sparked a flicker of wonder or renewed appreciation for the unseen wonders of our planet, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might find inspiration in Elias's dedication, and comment below with your thoughts on Elias's incredible life. What insights did you gain from his long quest? What other secrets do you think the vast ancient forests of our world might still hold, waiting to be discovered by those patient and empathetic enough to listen? And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating tales from the hidden corners of our planet, where myth and reality often intertwine in the most unexpected ways. Your support helps us continue to uncover stories like Elias's, bringing them to a wider audience, eager to explore the unknown.